In 1341 BCE, in a golden palace that shimmered under the Egyptian sun, a child was born who would become the most famous pharaoh in history. But here's the twist. During his lifetime, Tutankhamun was practically nobody. He ruled for less than a decade, died as a teenager, and was almost erased from history entirely. Yet today, over 3,300 years later, his name is more recognizable than pharaohs who ruled for half a century. How did a forgotten boy king become an immortal icon? The answer lies in the story of family secrets, religious warfare, mysterious deaths, and the greatest archaeological discovery ever made. So let's travel back in time together to ancient Egypt to uncover the true story of Tutankhamun, the boy king who conquered eternity. The world Tutankhamun was born into was chaos. His father Akhenaten had done something no pharaoh had ever dared. He tried to destroy Egypt's religion. For over 1,000 years, Egyptians worshipped dozens of gods. Amun, Ra, Osiris, Isis, and countless others. These gods were woven into every aspect of Egyptian life. From birth to death, from farming to warfare. The priests of these gods were wealthy and powerful, owning vast estates and controlling enormous resources. But Akhenaten declared there was only one god, Aten, the sun disk. He shut down temples across Egypt, fired thousands of priests, and confiscated their wealth. He moved the entire capital to a brand new city in the middle of nowhere called Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna. The priests were furious. The people were worried, confused.
I don't understand.
Egypt's allies abroad felt abandoned as diplomatic correspondence went unanswered. Egypt was in turmoil, religiously, politically, and economically. And into this religious revolution, a baby was born, originally named Tutankhaten, meaning living image of Aten. But there was something deeply wrong with this child, from the very beginning. Tutankhamun's parents were brother and sister, not half-siblings, full siblings. Both children of Pharaoh Amenhotep III and Queen Tea. Royal incest was common in Egyptian dynasties, meant to keep the bloodline pure and divine. The pharaohs believed they were gods on earth, and gods could not marry mortals. But the consequences were devastating. Modern DNA analysis revealed that Tutankhamun suffered from multiple genetic disorders. He had a cleft palate, a deformed foot, possibly clubfoot on his left side, and a weakened immune system. His spine showed signs of scoliosis, a curvature that would have caused him pain. His mother wasn't the famous Nefertiti, as many once believed, but a woman known only as the Younger Lady, an anonymous mummy found in tomb KV35. She died young, her cause of death still mysterious, her face damaged by ancient tomb robbers. So little Tutankhaten grew up in the palace of Amarna, raised by his wet nurse Maya, while his father continued his religious crusade. The boy learned to hunt, to shoot arrows, to drive chariots, despite his physical limitations. Over 130 walking canes were found in his tomb. Though many were ceremonial, elaborately decorated with gold and precious stones, some were clearly used, worn smooth by his grip. He suffered from chronic malaria, with DNA evidence showing he had Plasmodium falciparum, the deadliest form, which would have caused recurring fevers and weakness. As a child, Tutankhaten watched his father's grand experiment crumble. The people never fully accepted Artanism, continuing to worship the old gods in secret. Egypt's empire was weakening, with territories in Syria and Canaan slipping away. The economy suffered as temple workshops closed and trade networks collapsed. And then, when he was just 8 or 9 years old, everything changed. Forever. Akhenaten died around 1336 BCE, and his religious revolution died with him. The circumstances of his death remain uncertain. No body has ever been definitively identified as his. There were brief, uncertain reigns. Smenkhare ruled for perhaps a year, his relationship to the royal family unclear. Then came Neferuaten, possibly Nefertiti herself, taking on a male pharaonic identity. The historical record becomes fuzzy here, lost in the chaos. But by 1333 BCE, a child barely tall enough to hold a crook and flail was crowned Pharaoh of Egypt. Tutankhaten was 8, maybe 9 years old. Imagine that! An entire civilization, one of the most powerful kingdoms on earth, in the hands of a child. He couldn't rule alone, obviously. 2 powerful men stood behind the throne. An elderly advisor who may have been related to Nefertiti, possibly her father, and Horemheb, a military commander with ambitions of his own. These men made the real decisions. They controlled the treasury, commanded the armies, and issued decrees in the boy's name. And their first decision was to undo everything Akhenaten had done. The boy pharaoh's name was changed, from Tutankhaten to Tutankhamun, from living image of Aten to living image of Amun. It was a firm public declaration. The old gods were back. The heresy was over. Egypt would calm return to tradition. The restoration of Egypt's traditional religion wasn't just symbolic, it was urgent. After years of neglect, temples across Egypt were crumbling. Their roofs collapsed, their walls buried beneath sand. Priests had been scattered or impoverished, reduced to begging. The gods, Egyptians believed, were angry, punishing the land with poor harvests and military defeats. In his 4th year as pharaoh, around age 12, Tutankhamun issued the Restoration Stela, a massive stone proclamation erected at Karnak Temple. It described Egypt as a land abandoned by the gods, where prayers went unanswered and chaos reigned. If anyone prayed to a god to seek counsel, he would not come, the Stela proclaimed. If one beseeched any goddess in the same way, she would not come. The gods had turned their backs on Egypt because Egypt had turned its back on them. Tutankhamun, or rather his advisors, ordered the repair of temples, the restoration of priesthoods, and the return of offerings to Amun and the other gods. The capital moved from Amarna to Memphis for administration and to Thebes for religious ceremonies. Gold and silver flowed once more into the temples, enormous quantities of it. The stela boasts of statues made with gold, silver and lapis lazuli, of priests whose salaries were restored. The boy king, despite his youth, oversaw ambitious building projects. A Sphinx Avenue at Karnak, built from the recycled stones of his father's heretical monuments, and completion of colonnade halls at Luxor begun by his grandfather, Amenhotep III. He gave lavish gifts to the temples of Amun, Ptah, and other deities. For someone who would later be forgotten, Tutankhamun's restoration actually saved Egypt from religious civil war. It was smart politics, even if it came from his advisors rather than the boy himself. But ruling Egypt wasn't just about religion and building projects. It was about power, about showing Egypt's enemies that the kingdom was still strong. During Akhenaten's reign, Egypt's empire had nearly collapsed. Vassal states stopped paying tribute. Enemies encroached on Egyptian territory. Under the command of General Horemheb, Egyptian armies marched into Nubia to the south, reasserting control over the gold-rich region, and campaigned in Asia to the north, fighting against rebels in Syria. Diplomatic relations were restored with Mitanni, a kingdom that had nearly collapsed during Akhenaten's neglect. Tutankhamun himself probably never saw real battle. His health wouldn't allow it. His foot would have made standing in a chariot for hours impossible, but his tomb was filled with weapons. Bows, arrows, Khopesh swords, daggers, each one a masterpiece of craftsmanship. One dagger, now famous, had a blade forged from a meteorite. Iron from the stars, harder and sharper than any earthly metal. Ancient Egyptians called meteoric iron iron from the sky, considering it divine. The boy loved hunting, or at least the idea of it appealed to him. Paintings in his tomb show him shooting ostriches from his chariot, his beloved Ankhesenamun by his side, both frozen in artistic perfection. Speaking of Ankhesenamun, she was more than just his queen. She was his half-sister, daughter of Akhenaten and Nefertiti, meaning she'd watched her father's religious experiment just as he had. Their marriage, arranged when both were children, was another instance of royal incest, continuing the cycle that had already damaged Tutankhamun's health. They were depicted together constantly in tomb art. She adjusts his collar, she offers him flowers, accompanies him on hunts, pours him wine. The famous golden throne shows them in an intimate moment, sunlight streaming down in the Artan style. Their affection seemingly genuine despite the political nature of their union. Whether they truly loved each other or simply played their roles, we'll never know. But their marriage was marked by tragedy that would haunt them both. Ankhesenamun gave birth twice. Both babies were soft girls. Both were born low premature. Both died, probably within hours of birth. Their tiny mummified bodies were placed in miniature coffins and buried with Tutankhamun, the smallest coffins ever found in Egypt, heartbreaking in their delicate craftsmanship. Modern analysis shows one was born around 5 to 6 months gestation, the other around 7 to 8 months. Neither had a chance, their bodies showing the same genetic abnormalities that plagued their parents. The genetic damage from generations of inbreeding was too severe, the DNA too tangled. Tutankhamun and Ankhesenamun would have no heirs. No whisper son to carry on the dynasty, no soft daughter to marry into another royal line. This meant that when Tutankhamun died, the dynasty would face a succession crisis, one that would change Egypt forever. And that death came far sooner than anyone expected. Tutankhamun's health had always been fragile, a ticking time bomb of genetic problems. The malaria, the foot deformity, the genetic disorders. They were all catching up with him. Recent studies suggest he may have suffered from epilepsy, specifically temporal lobe epilepsy, which could have caused seizures, blackouts, and strange sensations. He had a partially cleft palate, not severe enough to impair speech, but noticeable. His immune system was compromised, making every infection potentially deadly. And then, around 1323 BCE, when he was just 18 or 19 years old, something happened. For decades, people speculated wildly about his death, concocting elaborate theories. Was he tense murdered? Struck on the head by a rival seeking the throne? Early X-rays in 1968 showed bone fragments in his skull, leading to sensational assassination theories, conspiracies involving Eye or Horemheb. Was it a tense chariot accident? He loved racing, after all. Tomb paintings showed him ore driving at full speed. Did he fall from his chariot and break his leg, dying from complications? CT scans in 2005 revealed the truth was more tragic and less dramatic than any conspiracy. Tutankhamun had a severe fracture in his left femur, his thigh bone, that occurred shortly before death, possibly just days. But it wasn't from an dramatic accident or assassination attempt. The bone showed signs of infection, possibly gangrene or sepsis, the flesh rotting while he still lived. Combined with his chronic malaria, which would have been flaring up again, and his weakened immune system, the infection overwhelmed him. He died, probably in agony, fever-racked and delirious in his palace, attended by priests and doctors who could do nothing. What happened next is one of history's great mysteries, preserved in fragmentary Hittite records. The Hittite king, Suppiluliuma, received a letter from an Egyptian queen, name unspecified, but almost certainly Ankhesenamun, with a desperate plea. She wrote, "My husband has died, and I have no son. They say you have many sons. If you would send me one of your sons, he could become my husband. I will never take a servant of mine and make him my husband. I'm afraid." Read that again. I am afraid. This queen, daughter of Pharaohs, widow of a pharaoh, was terrified. The Hittite king was suspicious. Was this a trap, an attempt to lure a Hittite prince to Egypt to be killed? He sent an ambassador to investigate, who returned all, confirming the letter was genuine. Eventually, after much deliberation, Suppiluliuma sent a prince named Zenanza to Egypt to marry the widowed queen. Zenanza never made it. He was murdered at the Egyptian border, killed by soldiers, almost certainly on orders from someone in the Egyptian court. Someone who didn't want a foreign prince on Egypt's throne, who saw an opportunity for himself. That someone was probably I, the elderly advisor who had guided Egypt through Tutankhamun's entire reign. The elderly advisor who had guided Tutankhamun since childhood claimed the throne for himself. He was around 70 years old, an unusual age for a new pharaoh in a society where most people died by 40. Evidence suggests he may have forced Ankhesenamun to marry him to legitimize his claim to the throne. A ring bearing both their names was found, though its authenticity has been disputed by some scholars. Images in Tutankhamun's tomb show Eye performing the opening of the mouth ceremony, a ritual traditionally performed by a son or heir, positioning himself as Tutankhamun's successor. Ankhesenamun disappears from history after this, vanishing like smoke. We don't know how she died, where she's buried, or what happened to her. Just whisper gone. Erased from the record as if she never existed. Did she die naturally? Was she killed? Did she live out her days in low obscurity? We'll probably never know. Eye ruled for only 4 years before dying himself, leaving no heir. And then General Horemheb, The military man who'd been waiting in the shadows all along took power. Horemheb ruled for nearly 3 decades, bringing stability back to Egypt. And during that time, he did something shocking, something that would alter history. He systematically erased the Amarna period from existence. Horemheb ordered Akhenaten's name chiseled off monuments, his images defaced, his memory destroyed. Tutankhamun's name was removed from king lists, his monuments usurped. Horemheb even backdated his own reign to make it seem like he'd succeeded Amenhotep III directly, skipping over Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and Ai entirely. Temples built by Tutankhamun had Horemheb's cartouche carved over them, claiming credit for the restoration. The city of Amarna was abandoned, systematically dismantled, its stones reused in other building projects. Within a generation, the Amarna kings were forgotten, considered a shameful period best left unremembered. For over 3,000 years, Tutankhamun was a footnote, a minor king mentioned in a few scattered references. Egyptologists in the 19th century knew his name, but considered him insignificant, not worth looking for, until one man refused to give up. Howard Carter was obsessed with finding Tutankhamun's tomb. By 1922, he'd been digging in the Valley of the Kings for years, funded by Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy British aristocrat with a passion for Egyptology. They'd found nothing but sand and disappointment. Every other tomb in the valley had been found and looted in antiquity, stripped of their treasures. Carnarvon was ready to give up, to cut funding and return to England. Carter begged for one more season, just one more, convinced the tomb was there. Carnarvon reluctantly agreed, giving Carter one final chance. On November 4th, 1922, Carter's team was clearing debris near the tomb of Ramesses VI when a worker's tool struck something solid. A stone step cut into the bedrock, then another and another. 12 steps led down to a sealed doorway bearing the necropolis seals and, faintly, the name Tutankhamun. Carter's hands must have been shaking as he read that cartouche. He sent a telegram to Carnarvon in England. At last have made wonderful discovery in Valley, a magnificent tomb with seals intact. Recovered same for your arrival. Congratulations. 3 weeks later, on November 26, 1922, with Carnarvon present, Carter made a small hole in the doorway and held up a candle. Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter, his voice shaking with emotion, replied with the most famous words in archaeology. "Yes, wonderful things." The tomb was relatively small for a pharaoh, just 4 rooms, KV 62 in archaeological designation. It was probably intended for a nobleman originally, repurposed hurriedly when Tutankhamun died unexpectedly. His sudden death meant there wasn't time to prepare a grand royal tomb like those of Seti I or Ramesses II. But those 4 crammed rooms were packed floor to ceiling with over 5,000 objects. Golden chariots, their wheels removed to fit through doors. Thrones, beds shaped like hippos and cows, clothing still folded, jewelry, weapons, perfumes in ancient alabaster jars, food, wine jars with their vintage still legible, board games, everything a pharaoh might need in the afterlife, thrown together in organized chaos. The burial chamber held 4 gilded shrines, nested inside each other like Russian dolls, each one more magnificent than the last, covered in protective spells and images of gods. Inside was a quartzite sarcophagus, its corners protected by goddesses with outstretched wings. Inside that, 3 coffins, also nested, each more elaborate. The innermost coffin was solid gold, weighing 110 kilograms, about 240 pounds, worth millions even then. And inside that lay Tutankhamun himself, wrapped in linen, his body blackened by the excessive oils and resins used in mummification. But his face was covered by the most iconic object in archaeology, the golden death mask. 11 kilograms of gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, turquoise, carnelian, and colored glass. The face of a boy king, idealized, serene, eternal. When Carter lifted that mask in 1925, 3 years into the excavation, Tutankhamun returned to the world he'd left 3,200 years before. The discovery became a global sensation overnight. Newspapers around the world ran headlines for months, years even. Tut mania swept through fashion, art, and popular culture like a fever. Suddenly, everyone wanted Egyptian jewelry, Egyptian furniture, Egyptian design in their homes. The Art Deco movement absorbed Egyptian motifs, angular patterns, and gold leaf everywhere. Movies featured mummies and curses, thrilling audiences with tales of ancient Egypt. Speaking of curses, Lord Carnarvon died just 5 months after the tomb's opening, from an infected mosquito bite that led to pneumonia and blood poisoning. The press sensationalized it as the curse of the Pharaohs, claiming that disturbing Tutankhamun's rest brought death to those who violated his tomb. Nonsense, of course, but it made great copy and sold newspapers. Other members of the expedition lived long lives. Carter himself lived another 17 years, dying in 1939 at age 64. But the curse story stuck, becoming part of Tutankhamun's legend, adding supernatural mystique to archaeological fact. The boy king who couldn't make history while alive became history's most famous Egyptian in death. His name more recognizable than Ramesses II, who ruled for 66 years. Today, Tutankhamun's treasures are the crown jewels of the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, though they'll soon move to the new Grand Egyptian Museum near the pyramids. The Golden Mask alone draws millions of visitors annually, people standing in long lines just to glimpse it. Scientists continue studying his mummy with ever more advanced technology. DNA analysis in 2010 confirmed his parentage and genetic disorders, solving century-old mysteries. Virtual autopsies reveal new details about his life and death, without damaging the remains. We know more about Tutankhamun now than Egyptians did a generation after his death. He's been CT scanned, his DNA sequenced, his face reconstructed by forensic artists. Yet mysteries remain, tantalizing gaps in our knowledge. Where is Ankhesenamun buried? What really happened in those final days of his life? Are there hidden chambers in his tomb, as some controversial radar scans suggest? The boy king still has secrets, still guards some of his mysteries even after 100 years of study. In the end, Tutankhamun's story is one of incredible irony, almost poetic in its contradictions. He was born into chaos, the son of a heretic king who tried to remake Egyptian religion. He inherited a broken kingdom at age 8 and spent his short reign trying to fix what his father had destroyed. He died young, probably in pain, without an heir to continue his line. His successors tried to erase him from history, considering him part of a shameful period. For 3,000 years he was forgotten, his name unknown except to a handful of scholars. And then, because his tomb was too small and insignificant for robbers to bother with, because it was buried under debris from other tombs, because ancient workmen built huts over its entrance, it survived intact. The pharaohs who ruled for decades, who built massive monuments and temples, who conquered vast territories and won great battles, they're known mostly to soft historians and specialists. But a sickly teenager who ruled for 9 years and built almost nothing, he's a household name, recognized by children and adults worldwide. His face is instantly recognizable, his golden mask one of the most famous images ever created. He's appeared on everything from album covers to candy wrappers, from postage stamps to Hollywood films. Tutankhamun conquered something far greater than empires or territories. He conquered time itself, achieving an immortality that pharaohs spent their entire reigns trying to secure. His story reminds us that history is unpredictable, that fame is both fleeting and eternal, and that sometimes the smallest lives leave the biggest marks on human memory. The boy king who was nobody became everybody's pharaoh, the face of ancient Egypt itself. And that's the true magic of Tutankhamun, a magic that no curse or spell could ever match.